Sign it, or you'll never see him again." Victoria Blackwood's words cut through the air like ice shards in the luxury penthouse suite of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Her daughter Katherine stood trembling before her, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the contract that would seal her fate. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, snow fell silently over Manhattan's glittering skyline, a stark contrast to the emotional storm raging inside. "Mom, please!" Katherine begged, her voice breaking. "You can't do this. You can't take David away from me." Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the mahogany desk. "I already have. Your little boyfriend is currently on a plane to Singapore, courtesy of a very generous job offer from one of my subsidiaries." Her lips curved into a cold smile. "Unless, of course, you sign the marriage contract with Charles Sterling Jr. right now." Katherine's hands shook as she looked down at the document. The words blurred through her tears. Pre-arranged marriage agreement and merger contingency stood out in bold black letters that seemed to mock her very existence. At 22, her entire future was being decided in a single moment, on Christmas Eve of all nights. "You have 10 minutes, Victoria continued, checking her Cartier watch. "After that, David's plane crosses into international airspace and the restraining order goes into effect. You'll never see or speak to him again." She paused, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Choose wisely, darling." The Christmas tree in the corner cast shadows across the room, its expensive ornaments twinkling with a hollow beauty that matched the emptiness in Victoria's eyes. Katherine looked at her mother, this woman who had once read her bedtime stories and kissed her scraped knees, and saw nothing but a stranger consumed by power and control. "Why are you doing this?" Katherine whispered, her fingers crumpling the edge of the contract. "What happened to you, Mom? When did you become so successful?" Victoria cut in sharply. "Powerful. Everything I've done for you. The merger with Sterling Industries will secure your future, our future. Love is a luxury we can't afford. Katherine, I learned that lesson the hard way." Before Katherine could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway outside. The heavy double doors burst open and a figure in a red suit stumbled in, surrounded by protesting security guards. But this wasn't just any intrusion. It was a mall Santa, his beard askew and his eyes blazing with purpose. "Let him go," a commanding voice rang out. All heads turned to see Charles Sterling Jr. himself standing in the doorway, his expensive suit dusted with snow, his face uncharacteristically pale. "This man has something we all need to hear." Victoria's composure cracked for the first time. "Charles, what is the meaning of this? Security, remove this intruder immediately." But the Santa stood his ground, reaching into his coat to pull out a worn envelope. "Victoria Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "You remember me, don't you, from St. Mary's Home for Children?" The color drained from Victoria's face. That name, Martinez, echoed through the room like a ghost from the past. Katherine watched in shock as her mother, the untouchable Victoria Blackwood, took an involuntary step backward. "Impossible," Victoria whispered. You can't be." "I was there the night you made the promise to Sarah," the Santa continued, his eyes filled with both kindness and accusation. "The night you swore you'd never become like the people who abandoned you. The night you promised you'd never put money above love." Katherine's mind reeled. Sarah, Martinez. Who was this man? And what secrets was her mother keeping? The Santa turned to Katherine, holding out the envelope. "Your Aunt Sarah wrote this letter 20 years ago, just before she died. She made me promise I'd deliver it when it was most needed, when history was about to repeat itself." Victoria lunged forward. "Don't you dare!" But it was too late. The envelope was already in Katherine's hands. And as she began to open it, the sound of tearing paper seemed to rip through the very fabric of their carefully constructed world. Inside was a photograph that made Katherine gasp. Two young girls in foster care uniforms, their arms around each other, smiling despite their circumstances. One was unmistakably a younger version of her mother. The other My God, Katherine breathed. Mom, what did you do? The clock on the wall struck 11, its chimes echoing through the tension-filled room. In 1 hour, at the stroke of midnight, the Christmas charity gala would begin downstairs, the event where Katherine's engagement to Charles was to be announced to New York's elite. But now, as snow continued to fall outside and long-buried secrets rose to the surface, it seemed that fate had other plans for the Blackwood family's Christmas Eve. Victoria stared at the photograph, her empire of glass and steel suddenly feeling as fragile as the snowflakes melting against the windows. The truth she'd spent decades burying was about to come to light, and with it, the power to either destroy or redeem not just her relationship with her daughter, but her very soul. Will Victoria's buried past destroy her daughter's future? Keep watching to discover the shocking truth that will change everything this Christmas Eve. Read it, the Santa urged gently, as Katherine's trembling fingers unfolded the yellowed pages of her aunt's letter. Victoria stood frozen, her carefully constructed mask cracking as decades of buried memories threatened to surface. Katherine's voice, soft but clear, began to read, "Dearest Victoria, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. The doctors say the cancer has spread too far, but that's not why I'm writing. I'm writing because I fear something else has spread even further. The darkness that took my sister away and left this stranger in her place. Do you remember that Christmas Eve at St. Mary's, Vicky? We were huddled under that thin blanket, sharing the single candy cane Sister Margaret had given us. You were 13, I was 8, and you promised me the world. When I turn 18, you said, I'll come back for you. We'll have a real home, with a Christmas tree that touches the ceiling and presents wrapped in gold paper. I believed you. Even after you aged out of the system and the letters became shorter, less frequent, I kept believing. When you changed your name from Martinez to Blackwood, I told myself it was just to fit into your new corporate world. When you stopped answering my calls, I convinced myself you were just busy building that better life for us both. But then came that day, 5 years ago, when I finally found you. I stood in the lobby of Blackwood Development with my hospital bills in hand, watching my sister in her designer suit step into an elevator without a second glance. You saw me, Vicky. You saw me, and you looked right through me. Victoria's knees buckled, and she gripped the edge of her desk. Charles Sterling Jr. moved forward as if to help her, but stopped, his own face troubled by what he was hearing. Katherine continued reading, her voice growing stronger with each word. I'm not writing this to condemn you, sister. I'm writing because I fear what the pursuit of power has done to your heart. The sister I knew, who held me through nightmares and shared her last bite of food with me, would never force her own daughter into a loveless marriage. Yes, I've been watching from afar. I've seen how Katherine's smile mirrors yours at her age. And I've seen how that smile is fading, just as yours did. Remember Michael Blackwood, the kind-hearted investor who saw past your rough edges and loved you for who you were. He believed in you, Vicky. He married you despite his family's objections, gave you his name, his love, and a beautiful daughter. But even his tragic death wasn't enough to shake you awake. Stop, Victoria whispered. But Katherine pressed on, tears streaming down her face. I'm dying, Vicky, but you've been dead inside for years. Every time you chose power over love, every time you buried another piece of your heart beneath those shining skyscrapers, you died a little more, and now you're doing the same to Katherine. But it's not too late. Not for her, and not for you. Look at her, sister. Really look at her. She has your strength, but she also has Michael's heart, the heart you once had too. Don't let her become another Victoria Blackwood. Don't let her learn too late that all the money in the world can't buy back a single moment of real love. The doctors say I have days left, but I've arranged for this letter to reach you when you need it most. Consider it my last gift to you, dear sister. A chance to remember who you were before the world hardened you, and who you can be again. With eternal love and hope, Sarah. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the snow fell harder, blanketing the city in white as if trying to cover the raw wounds that Sarah's words had exposed. Charles Sterling Jr. was the first to move, reaching into his pocket to pull out his phone. "I'm calling my father," he said quietly. "The merger can wait." He paused, looking at Katherine with new eyes. "Some things are more important than business deals." Victoria stood rigid, her face a battleground of emotions. "You don't understand," she said, her voice hoarse. "Any of you. I did what I had to do. After Michael died, leaving us with nothing but debt and dreams, you built an empire," Katherine finished, holding up the photograph of the two young sisters. "But at what cost, Mom? Look at this picture. Look at how you're holding Sarah, protecting her. That girl knew what really mattered. What happened to her?" The Santa stepped forward, and in the warm glow of the Christmas tree lights, something about his presence seemed to fill the room with an almost tangible compassion. "I was the janitor at St. Mary's," he revealed, removing his fake beard. "I watched you girls grow up, watched Victoria become a star student, determined to escape. But I also watched what that determination cost you. Victoria, year by year, success by success, you locked your heart away until you couldn't feel anything at all." A sudden commotion outside the window drew their attention. A helicopter was landing on the hotel's helipad, its blades cutting through the snowy night. Victoria's phone buzzed, a message from her head of security. "Mr. David Chen's plane has been grounded due to weather. He's demanding to return." Katherine's heart leaped, but before she could speak, the doors burst open again. A young man in a pilot's uniform rushed in, his face flushed with urgency. "Miss Blackwood," he panted, "there's something you need to know about Mr. Chen. The background check you ordered? We found something. He's not who you think he is. He's—" The pilot's next words would shatter what remained of Victoria's carefully controlled world, forcing her to confront not just her past decisions, but the true nature of love, power, and redemption. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the lives of everyone in that room hung in balance, waiting to see if the ice around Victoria Blackwood's heart would finally begin to thaw. Has a letter ever changed your life forever? Hit like if you believe in the power of family bonds and share your story in the comments. He's Sarah Martinez's son. The pilot's words hung in the air like suspended snowflakes. Victoria staggered backward, her hand flying to her throat. Katherine stood motionless, trying to process what this meant. That the man she loved, the man her mother had tried to banish, was her own cousin. "That's impossible," Victoria whispered, but the pilot was already pulling out a file. "David Chen was born David Martinez," he explained, handing the documents to Victoria with trembling hands. "He was adopted by the Chen family after Sarah Martinez's death. The adoption records were sealed, which is why our initial background check missed it. But he's known who you were all along. Miss Blackwood, he's been searching for you for years." Katherine turned to the Santa, the former janitor who had watched this story unfold from the beginning. "Did you know?" she demanded. "Is this why you brought the letter tonight?" The old man's eyes were kind, but filled with an ancient sadness. "David came to St. Mary's 6 months ago, looking for information about his mother and aunt. When he showed me a picture of his girlfriend, I knew it was time for the truth to come out. Some might call it coincidence that he fell in love with his cousin's daughter, but I call it fate's way of healing old wounds." Charles Sterling Jr. had been watching the scene unfold with growing understanding. "This is why he took the job at my father's company," he said softly. "Why he worked his way up so quickly. Caught my attention, caught Katherine's attention. He was positioning himself to find you, Victoria." Victoria sank into her leather chair, the weight of 2 decades of choices crushing down on her. The photograph of her and Sarah seemed to burn in her hands. "I looked for her," she whispered, so quietly they almost didn't hear. "After I married Michael, after I had Katherine, I went back to St. Mary's, but they told me Sarah had run away. I convinced myself it was better that way, that she would only remind me of everything I'd fought so hard to escape. But she never stopped loving you," the janitor said, pulling another envelope from his Santa suit. "There's something else you need to see, Victoria. Something Sarah left in my care, along with the letter." As he handed over the envelope, the sound of helicopter blades grew louder. David had arrived. Katherine moved toward the door, but Victoria's voice stopped her. "Wait," she said, opening the new envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a small, worn notebook, Sarah's diary. As Victoria began to read, her composed facade crumbled completely. "December 24th, 1995, she read aloud, her voice breaking. "Vicky came to visit today. She didn't see me watching from the stairs. She looked so different. Expensive clothes, perfect hair, a diamond ring that caught the light. She asked Sister Margaret about me, but when they told her I was gone, I saw relief in her eyes. Relief and something else, fear. She's afraid of her past, afraid of me. But I understand now. My big sister, who was always so strong, is actually terrified. Terrified that someone will see through her new identity, will reveal that Victoria Blackwood was once Victoria Martinez, the unwanted foster child." The diary entry continued, but Victoria's voice failed her. Katherine gently took the notebook and read, "I won't reveal her secret. I won't destroy what she's built. But I'll keep watching over her and over my beautiful niece, Katherine. Maybe someday, when the walls she's built around her heart begin to crack, she'll remember that love isn't a weakness. It's the only real strength we have." The elevator chimed, and footsteps echoed down the hallway. Katherine's heart raced, knowing David was moments away from walking through those doors. But Victoria spoke again, her voice different now, softer, almost like the girl in the photograph. "I died the day I walked away from St. Mary's," she said, standing slowly. "The day I decided that being Victoria Martinez wasn't good enough. I buried that scared little girl under degrees and achievements and acquisitions. I thought I was protecting Katherine by making her strong, by teaching her that love is a liability." She turned to her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "But I was wrong, so terribly wrong." The doors opened. David Chen stood there, snow melting on his shoulders, his face a mirror of Sarah's in the old photograph. He carried himself with the same quiet dignity that Sarah had shown in the lobby of Blackwood Development that day years ago, the day Victoria had pretended not to recognize her dying sister. "Aunt Victoria," he said simply. Victoria moved forward, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor. The room held its breath, wondering if she would call security, if she would maintain the walls she'd built so carefully over the years. Instead, she did something that shocked everyone, most of all herself. Victoria Blackwood, the queen of Manhattan real estate, the woman who had orchestrated billion-dollar deals without blinking, fell to her knees before her nephew and sobbed. "You have her eyes," she whispered through her tears. "How did I not see it? How did I not see her in you?" The clock struck 11:30, its chimes echoing through the emotionally charged room. In 30 minutes, the grand ballroom downstairs would be filled with New York's elite, waiting for an engagement announcement that now seemed as hollow as Victoria's former certainties. But as David helped his aunt to her feet, as Katherine moved to embrace them both, something new was taking shape in that penthouse suite. Something that Sarah Martinez had always believed was possible. The thawing of a frozen heart, the reunion of a broken family, and the possibility that even the deepest wounds could heal. Yet even as this moment of reconciliation unfolded, none of them noticed Charles Sterling Jr. quietly making a phone call in the corner, his face troubled by a secret that would soon test this newly awakened spirit of forgiveness in ways none of them could imagine. What would you do if you discovered your true love was connected to a family secret? Drop a or in the comments to show how this revelation made you feel. The penthouse suite had become unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that falls before a storm. Charles Sterling Jr.'s hushed phone conversation grew more intense by the second, his usually composed face betraying increasing distress. Victoria, still recovering from her emotional breakdown, watched him with growing suspicion, her business instincts, honed over decades of high-stakes negotiations, sensing that something was terribly wrong. David and Katherine stood together near the Christmas tree, their hands intertwined, while the old janitor in his Santa suit observed everything with knowing eyes. The snow continued to fall outside, coating Manhattan in a blanket of white that seemed to mute the city's usual chaos. "No, Father!" Charles's voice suddenly rose, sharp with anger. "You can't do this. Not to them. Not now." He paused, listening, his knuckles white around the phone. "They're people. Damn it, not chess pieces." Victoria stepped forward, her tears dried, but her heart still raw from the evening's revelations. "Charles, what's going on?" He turned to face them, and in that moment, he looked nothing like the cold, calculating businessman she'd chosen for her daughter. Instead, he appeared younger, vulnerable, and filled with a guilt that seemed to age him before their eyes. "I have to tell them," he said into the phone, then hung up before his father could respond. Taking a deep breath, Charles addressed the room. "There's something you need to know about the merger, about why my father was so insistent on this particular marriage arrangement." Katherine tensed, and David's arm tightened protectively around her. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her business mind already calculating possibilities, but nothing could have prepared her for what came next. "The sterling fortune is gone," Charles revealed, his voice hollow. "The company is on the verge of collapse. We've been operating on smoke and mirrors for the past year, using creative accounting and my father's reputation to keep investors from looking too closely. The merger with Blackwood Development isn't about expansion, it's about survival." Victoria felt the floor sway beneath her feet. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that my father planned to use the merger to siphon funds from Blackwood Development. Once the companies were joined, he would have gradually transferred assets, emptied accounts, and left you holding nothing but debt. The marriage was meant to make it all look legitimate. A family merger gone sadly wrong, with you taking the fall as the controlling mother-in-law who mismanaged everything." The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. She had prided herself on her business acumen, on never being outsmarted or outmaneuvered. Yet here she was, nearly sacrificing her daughter's happiness for a trap disguised as a triumph. "The irony," Charles continued, running a hand through his hair, "is that I was supposed to be just like him, the dutiful son carrying out the family legacy of deception. But then I met Katherine, really met her, beyond the society functions and charity galas. I saw her heart, her passion for helping others, her genuine goodness. And for the first time in my life, I couldn't play my part." He turned to Katherine, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I tried to protect you by stalling the engagement, by finding excuses to delay, hoping I could find a way to stop my father without destroying both our families. But I was a coward." David stepped forward, his face troubled. "The children's hospital where Katherine volunteers, the one that's been struggling for funding. Sterling Industries is one of their major donors, isn't it?" Charles nodded grimly. "My father's last act of charity before he planned to declare bankruptcy. Once the merger failed, the hospital would have lost everything. He knew it would devastate Katherine, make her more vulnerable, more likely to agree to a rushed marriage to save the children she cares about." Victoria felt bile rise in her throat. She had thought herself ruthless in business, but this was a level of calculated cruelty that shocked even her. And she had nearly handed her daughter over to it, all in the name of power and control. The old janitor, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "Sarah used to volunteer at that same hospital," he said softly. "It's where she spent her final days, still helping others even as she was dying. She believed that place had a special kind of healing magic, not just for the body, but for the soul." Katherine turned to her mother, her eyes shining with unexpected determination. "Mum, do you still have control of the Thompson Street properties? The ones you were planning to demolish for the new shopping complex?" Victoria blinked, surprised by the sudden change of subject. "Yes, but what does that have to do with those buildings?" Katherine continued, her voice growing stronger, "are perfectly situated for a medical facility. The zoning is already approved for development. Instead of another mall, we could create something that actually matters. We could save the children's hospital." The idea hung in the air, brilliant in its simplicity, Victoria found herself looking at her daughter with new eyes, seeing not just Michael's heart, but a business mind that had been developing all along, just in a different direction than she'd planned. Charles straightened, hope flickering across his face. The hospital's current location is owned by Sterling Industries. If we could orchestrate a property swap before my father declares bankruptcy, we could protect the hospital's assets. Victoria finished, her mind already racing through the legal implications. Transfer them to a new non-profit entity, completely separate from both Sterling and Blackwood. David stepped into the conversation, his presence a reminder of how fate had brought them all together. I have contacts in the medical development sector from my work at Sterling Industries. We could have preliminary proposals ready within days. As they began to discuss logistics, Victoria felt something shift inside her, a wall crumbling, a door opening. She watched her daughter confidently outlining plans to save not just the hospital, but potentially the Sterling employees who would soon be jobless. She saw David offering intelligent suggestions, his understanding of both business and humanitarian needs, reflecting a perfect blend of Sarah's compassion and the business acumen Victoria had once thought so crucial. The clock struck 11:45. In 15 minutes, the ballroom would be full of people expecting an engagement announcement. Instead, they would witness something far more significant, the transformation of a legacy. But before Victoria could voice her support for the plan, her phone buzzed with an incoming message. The color drained from her face as she read it. "Gerald Sterling is on his way up," she announced, her voice tense, "and he's bringing the board members from both companies." Charles cursed under his breath. "He's going to try to force the merger through tonight. With all the key players present for the gala, he'll want to capitalize on the holiday spirit and push for immediate signatures." The old janitor stood up, removing his Santa hat with dignity. "Then perhaps it's time for one final Christmas miracle." He reached into his coat and pulled out one last envelope. "Sarah left this too, Victoria. She made me promise to deliver it, only if you found your way back to your true self." Victoria opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a legal document, and as she read it, her eyes widened with a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. Sarah, even in her final days, had been working to protect not just Katherine, but everyone who might fall victim to the kind of ruthless business practices Victoria had once championed. The elevator was ascending, carrying Gerald Sterling and his entourage toward a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of two companies, but the soul of a family reborn. As Victoria held her sister's final gift, she realized that Sarah had given her everything she needed to make things right, if she had the courage to choose love over power one last time. Thunder rumbled in the distance, despite the snow, an unseasonable storm approaching just as the human drama reached its peak. In the reflection of the window, Victoria caught a glimpse of herself standing with Katherine and David. And for a moment, she saw Sarah there too, smiling with the same hope she'd carried all those years ago at St. Mary's. The elevator chimed. Want more emotional family stories that will touch your heart? Subscribe now and never miss another life-changing moment like this. The penthouse doors swung open with theatrical timing, revealing Gerald Sterling, a titan of industry whose very presence seemed to fill the room with Arctic chill. Behind him stood a phalanx of board members, their faces grave beneath their expensive suits and holiday accessories. The contrast between their formal business attire and the Santa suit still worn by the old janitor would have been comical if the stakes weren't so high. Victoria's fingers tightened around Sarah's final document as Gerald's cold eyes swept the room. Taking in the unlikely gathering, his son standing protectively near Katherine, David's presence, the tear stains still visible on Victoria's cheeks, his lip curled slightly, the only indication that this wasn't the scene he'd expected to find. "Victoria," he said smoothly, as if nothing were amiss. "I thought we might expedite matters. Why wait until midnight when all the necessary parties are here now?" He gestured to the board members. "Shall we proceed with the merger announcements?" The old Victoria would have recognized this power play for what it was, a masterful move to force her hand while witnesses were present. But the woman who stood before him now was neither the scared foster child nor the ruthless businesswoman she'd become. She was something new, forged in the crucible of this extraordinary Christmas Eve. "Actually, Gerald," she said, her voice steady, "I was just reviewing some interesting documentation." She held up Sarah's envelope. "Tell me, what do you know about the Robinson Healthcare acquisition of 1998? The change in Gerald's expression was subtle but unmistakable, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features like a shadow. "Ancient history," he dismissed with a wave. "Hardly relevant to tonight's proceedings." "Oh, but it is," Victoria continued, drawing strength from Katherine's presence beside her. "You see, my sister Sarah, yes, the sister I shamefully abandoned in my pursuit of power, she was a very thorough person. Before she died, she worked as a janitor at Sterling Industries." Victoria's voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "A position that gave her access to some very interesting files about how you acquired Robinson Healthcare and what really happened to their pension fund." One of the board members stepped forward, his interest piqued. "What pension fund issue?" Gerald's face hardened. "This is hardly the time for—" "It's exactly the time," Charles interrupted, moving to stand beside Victoria. "Father, it's over. The truth about Sterling Industries' finances is going to come out one way or another. The only question is whether we handle it with dignity or disgrace." Victoria unfolded Sarah's document. "My sister documented everything, the fraudulent transactions, the missing funds, the covered-up investigations. She didn't release it because she believed in redemption. She believed that someday someone would be brave enough to choose truth over power." She looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with pride. She was right. The board members were muttering now, several pulling out phones. Gerald's confident facade began to crack. "You're bluffing. Those records were destroyed years ago." "Were they?" Victoria pressed a button on her desk phone. "Miss Chen, would you please send up the files from Safety Deposit Box 247? David's eyes widened at the mention of his adoptive family's name. Victoria managed a small smile. "Yes, David. Your adoptive father, James Chen, was Sarah's lawyer. She trusted him to protect these documents until they were needed. Another thread in this tapestry of fate that brought us all together tonight." Within moments, Victoria's assistant entered with a thick folder bearing the Robinson Healthcare logo. The board members' expressions shifted from confusion to concern as they began to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding. Gerald Sterling made one last attempt to seize control. "Think carefully about what you're doing, Victoria. This mutually assured destruction benefits no one. If Sterling Industries falls, then we'll rebuild something better from the ashes." Katherine stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. "Mum, show them the proposal." Victoria nodded, pressing another button on her desk. The large screen on the wall came to life, displaying architectural plans for the Thompson Street property. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, instead of announcing a merger tonight, I'd like to propose something different, a transformation." Over the next several minutes, Victoria and Katherine laid out their vision. Converting the Thompson Street properties into a state-of-the-art medical center, saving the Children's Hospital while creating a new entity that would preserve jobs and services. The plan was ambitious but sound, reflecting both Katherine's humanitarian vision and Victoria's business expertise. "The Blackwood Martinez Medical Center," Victoria announced, watching Gerald's face as she deliberately used her original surname. "A partnership between private enterprise and public good, named in honor of a woman who never lost sight of what truly matters." The board members were nodding now, seeing not just a way out of the Sterling Industries disaster, but an opportunity for genuine positive change. Gerald Sterling stood isolated, his empire of deception crumbling around him. "You can't do this," he sputtered. But his words carried no weight anymore. Charles faced his father standing tall. "It's already done. The question is whether you'll step down gracefully or force us to release Sarah's evidence." The clock struck midnight as Gerald Sterling's shoulders sagged in defeat. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that gleamed under the emerging stars. The city that never sleeps seemed to hold its breath, waiting to witness the birth of something new. Victoria turned to the old janitor, who had watched everything unfold with quiet satisfaction. "You knew," she said softly. "You knew all along that this night would come." He smiled, adjusting his Santa suit. Sarah knew. She understood that love, real love, has a way of breaking down even the strongest walls. She believed in you, Victoria, even when you stopped believing in yourself. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The gala downstairs transformed from an engagement announcement into a celebration of the new medical center. Board members signed preliminary agreements, lawyers were summoned, and press statements were crafted. Gerald Sterling left quietly. His reign ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. As the excitement began to settle, Victoria found herself by the Christmas tree with Katherine and David. Charles had joined them, relieved of the burden of his father's expectations and free to pursue his own path. "I wish she could see this," Katherine said softly, looking at the old photograph of Victoria and Sarah. "She can," the old janitor said, his eyes twinkling. "Love like hers never really leaves us. It just waits patiently until we're ready to embrace it again." Victoria touched the tree's branches, remembering that long-ago Christmas at St. Mary's when she'd promised Sarah a tree that touched the ceiling. This one did, its lights reflecting off the snow outside and casting warm shadows across their faces. "David," she said, turning to her nephew, "there's something else we need to discuss." She reached into her desk and pulled out a document she'd had her lawyers prepare years ago, but had never had the courage to execute. The penthouse on Park Avenue, the one I've kept empty all these years. It was meant for Sarah, a home I bought hoping someday I'd be brave enough to find her again. I'd like you and Katherine to have it. David's eyes filled with tears. "Aunt Victoria and the Children's Hospital," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "needs a new chief of operations, someone who understands both business and compassion. Katherine, if you're interested." Katherine hugged her mother tightly, years of misunderstanding and control melting away like snow in sunlight. "I love you, Mom." As the first light of Christmas morning began to paint the sky in soft pastels, Victoria Blackwood, no, Victoria Martinez Blackwood, she decided, looked at her transformed family. Charles was discussing future charitable initiatives with David, their shared understanding of business now directed toward healing rather than profit. Katherine was glowing with the possibility of making a real difference in the lives of children who needed help. The old janitor had slipped away quietly, his work done. But on the table where he'd been sitting, Victoria found one final note in Sarah's handwriting. "Dearest Vicky, love is never a weakness. It's the only investment that always yields returns. Thank you for remembering who you really are. Forever your sister, Sarah." Victoria walked to the window, watching the city awaken to a white Christmas. Her reflection showed a woman she hadn't seen in decades. Not the power broker or the scared foster child, but someone new, someone whole. The walls she'd built around her heart had crumbled. But instead of feeling exposed, she felt free. In the end, Sarah had given her the greatest gift of all, the courage to choose love over fear, truth over power, and family over fortune. As the sun rose over Manhattan, Victoria Martinez Blackwood smiled, knowing that her sister's legacy would live on in the lives they would touch, the healing they would bring, and the love they would share. The true spirit of Christmas, she realized, wasn't in the presents or the parties or the power plays. It was in the quiet moments of grace, when we choose to be better than our fears, when we open our hearts to the possibility of love, and when we finally understand that the greatest empire we can build is one founded on compassion, truth, and the courage to begin again. And in that moment, surrounded by her family, both old and new, Victoria knew that this was just the beginning of their story. What would you have done in Victoria's place? Would you choose love over power if it meant losing everything you built? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and we'd love to hear your story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. With your support, we can keep bringing powerful stories of love, redemption, and family bonds every single day. And if you're ready for another emotional journey that will make you believe in second chances, click the video appearing on your left. Trust us, it's a story that will stay with you long after it ends. See you tomorrow with another unforgettable story.